Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. Welcome to Nightfall Whispers. Tonight, we're immersing ourselves in bone-chilling tales set against the backdrop of stormy mountains. Prepare for shivers down your spine as we journey into the mysterious unknown. Don't forget to subscribe for more and share your thoughts in the comments. Now, where are you listening from? Let's plunge into these terrifying tales. This story is genuine, though as time passes, I question how much was real and how much was my overactive childhood imagination. There's no doubt that the fear and anguish I felt were absolutely real, and I remember those feelings with crystal clarity. This is the story of the most horrifying vacation of my childhood. I was 12 years old, and my brother Victor was 15. My parents had divorced about 2 years earlier, and my father had just remarried Natalia, my current stepmother. My dad moved in with her and her grandmother Eva in a comfortable mountain lodge. Natalia and Eva were kind people, and I had no immediate issues with them. Shortly after their marriage, my father wanted to take me and Victor on vacation to bond with our new family. Natalia's family owned an ancient wooden lodge deep in the Carpathian Mountains, about 3 hours east of our home. We would be spending a week there, swimming in the natural mountain lake, having barbecues, playing games, typical family activities. I was completely against leaving my mother's home. At the time, all I wanted was to play video games and eat pizza rolls, which was my perfect idea of summer vacation. Nevertheless, Victor and I packed our bags and went along. The lodge was enormous and incredibly old. It had belonged to Eva's late husband's ancestors, and although it had been renovated, it remained mostly vacant throughout the year, except for occasional family retreats. Victor and I each got separate rooms, and we unpacked our things. His room was just down the hallway from mine. He peeked into my room shortly after settling in. "Hey, wanna go swimming?" "All right," I muttered, putting down my handheld game console and fishing for my swim trunks in my backpack. Dad and Natalia had gone to the village store, leaving just me, Victor, Eva, and her small terrier at the lodge. It was a hot summer day. We hiked down to the lake and swam. Victor and I had many pool games we would play, like who could hold their breath longest, or trying to understand what the other was saying underwater. I was starting to enjoy myself, and forgetting about being upset over being dragged away from my precious game console and summer gaming haven back home. That was also when things started to get eerie. I remember running along the shoreline, with the terrier chasing me, when the bushes bordering the property started to rustle. It felt as though something was running alongside me. The moment this thought entered my head, I immediately panicked and jumped into the lake. The terrier started barking frantically, as it usually did when we jumped into the water. The odd thing was that when I surfaced, the dog was barking at the bushes, not at me. This could have been just a small animal, but I remember staring intently at the bushes and feeling deeply unsettled. I told Victor what had happened, and he was very amused by the fact that I was frightened by what was probably just a fox or wildcat. The day continued. We played card games, ate dinner, watched a movie, and then retreated to our rooms. My biggest mistake was letting Victor know I was spooked, because he spent about an hour trying to scare me by breathing heavily from the hallway or sneaking into my room and grabbing my feet. After the last incident, I let out a blood-curdling scream. Dad rushed upstairs to see Victor rolling on the floor with laughter while my face was, as he put it, as pale as a mountain ghost. Dad told us to stop and sent Victor back to his room. I fell asleep, but what I experienced that night was one of the most terrifying incidents of my life. It was my first encounter with what I would years later come to understand as sleep paralysis. I woke up in the dark room, unable to move or speak. A dark, shadowy figure hovered inches above my face. It moved back and then shifted menacingly from one side of the room to the other. All I remember is trying my hardest to yell for help, but I couldn't make a sound. The entity had a blurry humanoid form and emanated such a dark, malevolent presence. When it finally dissipated and my mobility returned, I ran quickly from my room and downstairs to my father's room. I shook him awake, and he turned around, already fully alert with the biggest smile on his face. He started snickering. "What's wrong, Alexei?" he asked mockingly. "I freaked out, Dad," I yelled. "What's my middle name?" This was my way of confirming this laughing man was really my father. The question caused him to start laughing maniacally. My body froze in sheer terror. He tilted his head unnaturally. "Mikhailovich," he said. It was indeed my middle name, but this man was not my father. As quickly as this realization came to me, I woke up. I immediately turned on the lights and spent the remainder of the night sitting up in my bed, playing on my handheld console, trying desperately to forget the dark nightmare. All this had rational explanations, but what happened for the remainder of the trip is where I, and I'm sure many readers, will start to question the mental stability of my 12-year-old self. I told everyone at breakfast the next morning about my nightmare. For the most part, they laughed and thought it quite amusing. Natalia showed sympathy and gave me a hug, saying that if it happened again, I could stay in their room. Eva, however, seemed very interested, but didn't say a word, and would stare uncomfortably at me for the remainder of the day. The day and following night passed without incident. When entering a room, Dad would tilt his head jokingly, saying Mikhailovich, and Victor never stopped teasing me about it. "What's your middle name, Alexei?" It actually helped alleviate my fears and left me feeling silly about the whole thing. So much so that I had no problem being left at the lodge alone with Eva when Victor had to be taken to the clinic for a severe insect bite the next day. It was about 3:00 in the afternoon, just as bright and sunny as it had been all week. I was heading down to the lake when Eva stopped me from the kitchen. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just going for a swim," I responded as I made my way to the back door. "I mean your nightmare. They can be quite frightening." "Are you okay?" she continued. "Yeah," I forced a laugh. "It was just a dream." "I'm fine," still trying to move toward the door. I had terrible nightmares as a girl in these mountains, so I know just how frightening they can be. She looked at me sincerely. I said nothing. She continued, "Do you pray?" I rarely did, despite my upbringing. "Yeah, I do," I lied, hoping to end the conversation quickly. "Good. Make sure you pray as much as you can. Sometimes it's the only way to get rid of them." The way she emphasized them made me feel cold, as if the nightmare was much more than just a nightmare. "Okay, I will," I said, likely in a shaky voice. With that, I finally made my way to the lake, hoping to not think about it again and just swim around in the sun. I love to swim and play pretend by myself, acting like a torpedo or a dolphin, doing handstands and flips underwater, throwing punches and kicks as if fighting underwater monsters. At one point, I tried to see if I could hold my breath and torpedo my way from one end of the lake's swimming area to the other without surfacing. I did it successfully a couple of times and felt pretty accomplished. On my last attempt, I surfaced with barely any air left in my lungs near the small wooden dock and saw her. A little girl younger than me was hanging her head over the edge of the dock right above me. We were face to face. She had wet, dark hair that I swore I could feel brush against my forehead. She was pale with gray circles around her eyes, and worst of all, she was smiling menacingly at me as I gasped for air. With empty lungs, I couldn't scream, so I flailed helplessly in the water, somehow managed to get to the shore, and ran back to the lodge without looking back. "Goodness, you're soaking wet. Dry yourself off," Eva cried as I came rushing in. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Are you okay? Did you almost drown? Here, let's get you a towel." She went out to the porch, and my eyes followed her through the window. No girl, of course, just the empty lake with an unoccupied dock. "Come out, dear. You're getting the floor soaked." I went out and explained what I saw. She immediately gave me a hug and tried to calm me down. I wanted her to tell me that there was no such thing as ghosts, and that my mind was just playing tricks on me. I wanted her to tell me anything that would comfort me, but she didn't. She took everything I said as actually happening, and even asked for more details about the girl, and if I had seen anything else. "No, nothing else. Just her," I said. "I don't know what to do," she muttered, grasping me by the shoulders and looking intently into my eyes. "Child, you need to pray. God will help it all go away." I hated how seriously she was taking this. I hated how she gave validity to what I saw and talked about it as a real, tangible thing. Looking back, I think she would have caused me much less anguish if she had just brushed it off as a silly childhood trick of the imagination. She didn't. "Okay, I will pray," I said quietly. She continued to look at me, dissatisfied with my answer. "Here, dear, let's go inside and we'll pray now." After drying off, we sat down at the table. She grabbed my hand and started praying aloud. I don't remember exactly what she said in her prayer, but it was something along the lines of asking the Holy Spirit to be with me. I will admit it made me feel better. "I won't tell your father unless you want me to," she said afterward. "Nobody else has to know." At this point, I felt completely silly about the whole thing. I didn't want my dad to know, or anyone else for that matter, even her. I just wanted it to go away. I didn't want to pray every night, and I didn't want people to think I thought I saw a ghost. I wanted normalcy. "It's fine. I really do think it was just me imagining things," I said. I remember briefly heading upstairs to my room, being freaked out by being alone, grabbing my game console, and heading back downstairs to play it in the front room. That night, after an evening of card games and pizza, we watched a comedy film. I fell asleep on the couch. The nightmare that followed paled in comparison to the one I had the other night, and to this day was the most unsettling dream I've ever had. The same little girl who had haunted me with her presence earlier that day revisited me in my dream. In the dream, she was not eyeless, pale, and seemed much more normal and human, actually turned out to be quite friendly. She apologized for scaring me and told me her name, although I completely forget it. The dream consisted of us traveling everywhere from an old school that she said was hers, to a science museum, to a county fair. It was all very vivid and not at all frightening. We ended up at one point lying down in the grass and just talking and becoming friends. I ended up liking her. Then I went home to my mom's house where I grew up. What I experienced there disturbed me so much that it made me sick in the dream and upon waking up. When I entered the house, my family wouldn't acknowledge me unless I screamed at them. And when they finally did, they did so in an annoyed and disinterested manner, like I didn't matter. I walked through the house, and every picture of me was somehow distorted. In one family picture in which I was holding my favorite toy, my eyes were completely gone. In another, a picture of me from kindergarten, I had dark eyes, a beard, and a golden tooth, comical perhaps to those reading, but completely terrifying to me in my dream, and one where I had no face at all. It was such a dark feeling. I had been replaced by something sinister and demonic, and my family no longer recognized me. The little girl then began laughing hysterically at me. "What did you do? What happened?" I begged for an answer. She continued to laugh. Then my entire family joined in, laughing at me. My mother picked her up and headed out of the room. She continued to laugh at me over my mother's shoulder. I was then enveloped by darkness and despair. Nothingness. I woke up about 1:00 a.m. to find myself alone in the dark, empty living room. My family had all gone to bed. The sickness persisted, even after realizing it was just a dream. I turned on the nearest light and ran upstairs, not bothering to turn it back off. I didn't dare sleep alone, so I snuck into Victor's room with a blanket and a pillow and decided to sleep on the floor. With me, I also had my game console and the small bendable LED light that came with it. I couldn't sleep. I tried my best to just play my game and shut out the world. The lodge wouldn't let me. It would creak, moan, and whisper, haunting my every waking moment. I retreated into a corner and held my game light against the room, scanning the walls for anything unnatural. I was completely terrified. I heard Victor shift in his bed. I quickly moved the dim light over to him. I saw him sleeping on his back with one arm standing straight in the air, his wrist limp. Then all of a sudden, his arm dropped back down to the bed. This was enough for me. I darted to turn on the light and woke him up. "What are you doing?" he asked tiredly. "Please, we need to keep the lights on, Victor," I asked helplessly. "Oh my God, you're such a baby. Get out of my room and go sleep in yours." I had no choice but to explain to him everything that had happened, the girl on the dock, the nightmare, his arm being raised in the air as if by some ghostly presence. While explaining all this, a muffled scream, as if from a little girl, came from downstairs. His widened eyes met mine. The terrier started barking loudly for about 10 seconds, then stopped. "Silence. Should we go check it out?" I finally managed to ask. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. I babysit for a living. It's not the most glamorous work, but once you're over 21 and have built up enough good reviews, it becomes a pretty steady source of income. Many families in Prague are willing to pay good money for a reliable sitter they can trust with their children. It's what's kept me afloat since I moved to the Czech Republic a few years ago. And while I plan to eventually move into another field, I'm quite content with my current situation. Of course, sometimes work dries up. Last summer was particularly stressful, as one of my regular families suddenly decided to put their 3-year-old son in daycare instead, leaving me scrambling through my savings and asking friends for temporary loans until school started again. In mid-August 2018, however, I was doing a quick fill-in job with a child I used to pick up from school regularly, when I received a notification that a family in Old Town needed someone to watch their daughter for the next 2 weeks. I sensed that their problem and mine could solve each other, so I quickly sent my contact information and arranged to call the mother after finishing my current job. We hit it off immediately, and I showed up at their beautiful apartment near the Charles Bridge early the next morning to meet my new temporary charge. She was a bright, happy little girl. No signs of maladjustment or social awkwardness. For the purposes of this story, I'll call her Lena. Lena was very much the kind of little girl who enjoys wearing several colorful bracelets at once and a tutu over her leggings. Since most of my babysitting experience had been with little boys, it was refreshing to do things like painting nails and playing with dolls for a change. While we were at a playground in Letna Park, I heard Lena talking to herself. I asked if she was playing pretend, and she said she was talking to her friend. She pronounced the friend's name as Adela, and I didn't think much of it. Imaginary friends are completely normal for small children, and Lena even preemptively told me that she and her friend were just playing tag. Over the next few hours, she mentioned that Adela was a little girl, age 5, 2 years younger than Lena herself, and that she liked to give hugs. It was cute, and I certainly wasn't going to discourage this harmless, imaginative play. I'd had imaginary friends of my own as a child. Later that day, I mentioned that I collected vintage dolls, and Lena asked if I could bring them over to play with. After getting proper reassurance that she'd be gentle with them, I agreed and showed up the next day with a bag full of my collection. Lena was particularly drawn to an antique porcelain doll with dark ringlets and a blue velvet dress. I made a mental note to find a similar doll for Lena before the job was over. While we were playing in the living room, I heard a strange chittering sound coming from Lena's bedroom. The apartment was fairly spacious, but the hallway was short, so the sound wasn't difficult to locate. However, Prague is filled with pigeons, so I casually mentioned that we should check if there was a bird outside her window. "Oh," said Lena, "that's not a bird. That's Adela." I frowned slightly. "I thought you said Adela was a little girl." "Well, she doesn't look like one anymore," Lena replied matter-of-factly. I was sufficiently unnerved by this that I suggested we go somewhere else that day, perhaps a museum or something. We ended up at the National Museum at the top of Wenceslas Square, on the other side of the city center. Lena asked if we could visit the historical exhibits so she could show me something, and I agreed. I figured she was still excited about the antique doll and wanted to see more old-fashioned things. Lena started dashing through the museum halls, and I followed her until she stopped excitedly in front of a glass display case and pointed. The exhibit contained the mummified remains of a 5-year-old girl from medieval Prague named Adela. That was a bit morbid, but I didn't judge. I had rather spooky pretend games when I was Lena's age. My fascination with vintage dolls had started because I was drawn to their sometimes eerie appearance. As for the chittering sound, that was probably just Lena incorporating that noise into her game. No different than when the lights would flicker in my childhood home, and I'd say my ghost friends did it. That evening, I casually mentioned what had happened to Lena's mother, and the color drained from her face. She showed you Adela. You saw her? Yes, I replied, confused by her reaction. Why, I thought it was cute. She's got a thing for history. It's adorable. Lena's mother pulled me into the kitchen, while Lena played with the porcelain doll in the living room and lowered her voice. She explained that their family had only lived in Prague for 2 years, since Lena was not quite 5. They had moved from Vienna, and when they first arrived, Lena's parents took turns taking her to various attractions, while the other parent stayed home to unpack. Adela made her first appearance days before they'd ever brought Lena to the National Museum. Lena was talking to her and playing with her before she'd ever seen Adela's remains. In fact, it was Lena who asked if they could go to what she called the big stone building with the dome, because Adela wants to show me something. When Lena's mother brought her there, Lena had run through hallways she'd never been down before and stopped at a display case she'd never seen, excitedly telling her mom, "There's Adela." I didn't know how to respond and felt suddenly very uncomfortable. I changed the subject to how much Lena liked the dolls, and we agreed that I'd try to find her a similar one within the next few weeks. Adela never showed any signs of malevolence or control over Lena, though I still couldn't shake the memory of that chittering sound. It was only a few days before my last day taking care of Lena that I remembered something I'd read about medieval Prague beliefs, that the spirits of children who died before their time sometimes remained, appearing as small birds that would chittering near the places they once lived. I still babysit in Prague. Sometimes I pass the National Museum and wonder about Adela. Lena's family moved back to Vienna the following year, but they still send me Christmas cards with pictures of Lena, always smiling, always wearing colorful bracelets, always holding that porcelain doll I eventually gave her as a parting gift. And sometimes, when I walk past old buildings in Prague at dusk, I hear what sounds like a child's laughter mixed with the gentle chittering of birds. I don't look back anymore. Some things are better left unacknowledged. I never thought I would regret a spontaneous decision so intensely. I consider myself a logical person. Supernatural nonsense doesn't exactly resonate with me. If something strange happens, I immediately try to find a scientific explanation. I think this night terrifies me because there is no rational explanation, no real closure for what happened to us during what should have been a simple camping trip. As a 24-year-old mother who'd recently completed service with the Royal Navy, I wanted to spend quality time with my 3-year-old daughter Emma. Military service meant I'd spent much of her early life away, and I desperately wanted to reconnect. The camping trip was a spontaneous decision. I've always been good at those. I didn't want a typical campground with caravans parked neatly in rows. I didn't want other people around pretending to be camping while they lounged on folding chairs next to their vehicles. I wanted authentic, primitive camping in the wilderness. That's actually harder to find in Britain than you might expect. I turned to Google, found a place about 2 hours from Glasgow, and packed up the car. I invited the people I was living with, and yes, it was a complicated arrangement. There was my now ex-partner James, his new girlfriend Olivia, and our male flatmate William. At the time, we were all navigating relationship tensions without arguing, so we were being friendly and cordial. They agreed to the camping trip. We figured it would be nice to get away together. We even brought our dog Bailey. The moment we were all in the car, I entered the address into the navigation system, and off we went. That's when the trouble started, probably when we should have turned around. It was about 3:00 p.m. When we left, my navigation suggested it would take about 2 hours to reach the camping area, enough time to hike the mile from the car park to the site, set up camp, and enjoy the evening before it became too dark. Satisfied, we brought out snacks and enjoyed swapping funny stories while Emma ate biscuits in the back seat. By 6:00 p.m., we realized we couldn't find the bloody place. My navigation kept insisting we had arrived, but there was no campground in sight, just a winding road through dense Scottish woodland. Frustration mounting, I stopped at a small village shop and asked for directions to the campground. After they finished laughing at me, the elderly shopkeeper told me I'd overshot the camping area by nearly an hour. She handed me an old-fashioned paper map, showed me the route, and continued chuckling as I purchased the map and left. I walked back to the car feeling irritated, but also unsettled. The woman had laughed far more than seemed normal. I chalked it up to being a city dweller lost in the countryside, and continued on our way. Once we were on the right track, our friendly banter resumed. It was starting to get dark, but I didn't want to be discouraged. We could do this. It was just a simple camping trip, easy peasy. I realized how wrong I was when it took another hour and a half to find the campground. There was supposed to be a prominent sign and a small gravel area for cars. Now in near darkness, that prominent sign turned out to be a weathered wooden post half hidden by foliage. We had driven past it repeatedly for over an hour, arguing about whether we should give up the search for this elusive place. William finally spotted the sign. Gratefully, I parked in the small clearing, and James happily pointed out the narrow trail we were looking for. It looked more like a deer path than a walking trail. This was the primitive camping experience I'd been hoping for. We put on our backpacks filled with gear and sprayed ourselves with insect repellent. I handed Emma her water bottle and took her hand. She was tired but excited to be out of the car. Bailey trotted beside us, pulling his leash, alert but happy. We followed the path for about half a mile before coming into a clearing. There were large stone formations arranged in a rough circle, and a small wooden information kiosk stood at one end. I distinctly remembered the website stating we needed to walk a full mile before reaching any camping areas. But no one wanted to listen to me. Everyone was tired, it was dark, and we just wanted to set up camp. I set Emma down by the kiosk as a light drizzle began to fall. The weather forecast hadn't predicted rain, but it was warm and muggy, so we welcomed the light shower. We tied Bailey to the kiosk, while William went to prepare the fire pit. James and Olivia started setting up the tent. Emma stayed by William's side as I went to find some dry wood under the trees. That's when curiosity got the better of me, and I examined the information display. I expected trail numbers and a map. Instead, I read about an ancient Celtic stone circle dating back thousands of years. "Hey guys," I called, my voice shaking slightly. "This is a prehistoric ritual site." James and William shrugged. "My family has Scottish heritage," James said. "I think we're good." "I'm part Welsh," Olivia added, as if ancient DNA would somehow protect us. "And Emma's got Celtic blood too," James pointed out with a smile. I nodded at them. "I'm purely English. I don't want to camp next to an ancient stone circle." "If we keep walking down the path," William shook his head. "We'll be fine, Fiona. We're all exhausted, and I don't fancy hiking any further." "Fine," I sighed. "But if something happens, I want it publicly known that I did not want to camp here." I turned toward the stone circle. "I mean no disrespect," I murmured. "Please let us camp here for the night." The others laughed and made jokes about making offerings before returning to their tasks. I grabbed the hatchet we'd brought and my folding knife, then set off to find firewood. Emma stayed with William in case I encountered any wildlife and needed to fight or flee. "Oh look, some idiots left rubbish here," I muttered, spotting debris near the stones. Olivia had followed me. "That's disrespectful," I nodded. "Remind me to pick that up before we leave. I don't want any bad energy following us." We wandered down a separate path to find firewood. After we'd walked through some massive spider webs and collected a decent amount of wood, we returned to find a small fire going and our tent erected. Bailey was dozing peacefully near the tent, and Emma was happily playing in the dirt. I smiled. Finally camping. The crickets and frogs were making peaceful sounds. The sky was thick with clouds, but there was a pleasant breeze, even if the air was stiflingly humid. I tried to get William alone to talk to him, but he was being withdrawn and moody. James and Olivia retreated to the tent to relax and chat, which left me on my own. I decided to work off some frustration by chopping firewood from a fallen tree a short distance down the main path, away from everyone else. Alone in the dark, my anger made me fearless until I reached the tree. I felt eyes on me. Not malicious eyes, but definitely watchful. As I walked down the path, my anger evaporated, replaced by rising fear. I've been camping before and have been observed by foxes, badgers, and other wildlife. This didn't feel like those times. I didn't feel threatened, just watched. I tried to dismiss it as anxiety from being alone in the woods. After reading the information about the stone circle, I started swinging the hatchet and immediately felt better, still watched, but better. I chopped until I'd removed most of the fallen trees' larger branches. My shoulders ached from the effort. I grabbed my torch and turned to leave when I heard something rustle in the bushes. I jumped, hatchet in one hand, torch in the other. Olivia appeared around the bend, and my heart nearly stopped. "You scared me half to death," I exclaimed. She wanted to talk, so I gathered the newly cut firewood and we walked back together. When we returned, James and William were talking rapidly, their voices hushed but intense. I dropped the firewood and asked what had happened. "We saw a woman in old-fashioned clothes," James exclaimed, pointing to the far side of the stone circle. "She was right there. William saw her too, didn't you?" I looked around, confused and suddenly realizing Emma wasn't nearby. "Where's Emma?" I demanded, my voice sharp with sudden fear. "In the tent playing. She was getting bitten by midges even with the insect spray," James said quickly. "Can you believe it?" he continued. "William, tell them." William didn't say anything. He sat by the fire, poking at it with a stick, his eyes wide and fixed on the flames. For a moment we were all silent, listening to the crackling fire. It was as if we all felt it simultaneously. That same feeling of being watched overwhelmed us, and I swallowed hard, my hand instinctively moving to the knife at my hip. "Do you?" I started, but William jumped up and put his finger to his lips. "SHH. Do you hear that?" he whispered, his eyes widening further. We listened intently. I suddenly realized all the normal forest noises had stopped. No crickets, no frogs, no rustling insects. Just silence and a faint rhythmic sound. "Is that drums?" Olivia whispered. "We're miles from any village," I whispered back. "There are no drums out here." "Definitely drums," James said, his voice somber. The bushes across the fire rustled violently, and we all jumped. The wail that followed the movement was enough to make Olivia scream. It sounded horrible, like a woman in agony. It also sounded terrifyingly close. William turned to look at me, his eyes wide with fear. "Get in the tent," I ordered. "Put another log on the fire. It could be a wildcat or a fox." The howl didn't sound like any animal call I'd researched before our trip, but I wasn't going to take chances. Bailey, typically calm and well-behaved, was snarling and pulling at his leash. I untied him and ushered him into the tent with us. For a while we all sat in tense silence, listening. The strange quiet had returned, and we whispered about it nervously. Olivia suggested we listen to music on her phone to calm ourselves. I watched the fire through the mesh window of the tent. The flames were dying down, which made me uneasy. "We need to put more wood on the fire," I said into the music-softened silence. No one volunteered to go outside. It had been about half an hour since the strange wail. My daughter was still quietly playing with Bailey and the toys we'd brought. It seemed odd that she was still awake and so quiet throughout all this, but we were too on edge to really notice. Frustrated that neither of the men was offering to tend the fire, I grabbed the hatchet and a torch. William shook his head. "Fiona, the fire's almost dead. Look, it's just embers. Don't go out there. If it's a wildcat, it'll be braver facing just one person." I shook my head and reached for the tent zipper. Just as I started to open it, William gasped. Through the fabric of the tent, I could see the fire suddenly blaze back to life. I walked back to the window, carefully stepping over Emma, who had finally decided to lie down. The fire was crackling, vigorously despite the wood having burned down to ash. Perhaps a breeze had stirred the embers. "I'm going to put a log on before it burns out again," I muttered, trying to mask my fear with practical action. Before anyone could protest, I unzipped the flap and stood up in the firelight. I scanned the bushes for the telltale reflection of animal eyes, but saw nothing. I heard nothing either. I swallowed hard and made my way to the woodpile, hatchet ready in case something lunged at me. I felt the eyes again, not threatening, not hostile, just watching. It was the most unnerving sensation I've ever experienced. I'd almost prefer something attacking me outright than this creeping, persistent observation. I placed 3 logs on the surprisingly robust fire, and feigning calmness, walked back to the tent. "Let's try to sleep before the fire goes out," I suggested, lying down beside my drowsy daughter. "If we stay up like this, we'll just keep scaring ourselves silly. It's the wilderness, after all." William lay down on Emma's other side. James and Olivia arranged themselves near our feet, so we were all comfortable. Despite the warm night, I draped my arm protectively around my daughter. She closed her eyes, and as I closed mine, the screaming began. Emma sat bolt upright. She hadn't been asleep for even a second. She clamped her hands over her ears and started singing "Rain, Rain, Go Away" at the top of her lungs, screaming the words as if in terrible pain. We all jerked upright, and I quickly grabbed her, trying to soothe her, trying to pull her hands from her ears. My heart was pounding furiously. Everyone was staring at her in shocked silence. She wouldn't stop screaming and singing, screaming and singing. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she wouldn't stop. Suddenly, she fell silent mid-scream and opened her eyes. She looked distant, thoughtful, older than 3, as if she wasn't fully awake. She stated calmly, "The Ancient Ones are coming." First, let me assure you that no one had mentioned anything about the stone circle or ancient rituals in front of her. She was 3 years old. She could form simple sentences, but I had never taught her "rain, rain, go away." She didn't attend nursery. No one else had told her about the Celtic stones. We had talked about frogs and crickets, but nothing else. After she made that statement, the silent forest erupted. I have no better way to describe the sudden cacophony that assaulted us. There were hundreds of animal sounds, screaming, howling, growling, barking, hooting all around us. Steady, brave Bailey was shivering and whimpering in the corner of the tent, as far from Emma and the entrance as possible. My daughter resumed her singing and screaming, while the rest of us panicked. "What the bloody hell is going on?" James was shouting. "Do you hear the drums?" "It sounds like a battle," Olivia cried. I placed my daughter back on the ground. Her eyes were rolling wildly, and I didn't know what to do. My heart felt ready to explode. My hand gripped my knife, but what good would that do? Didn't the Celts imitate wildlife to communicate during battles? William yelled over the impossibly loud noises. "Yes," I muttered, eyes wide. "They did. I remember reading about that." We were shouting at each other now over the violent rustling of bushes, the thunderous drumming, and the horrible screams. There was that wail again, the agonized woman, the screeching fox, the howling wolf so close. I felt a panic attack brewing until I looked at Emma again. Then I was furious. "Leave her alone," I screamed, standing up. "She's 3. This is her first camping trip. Leave her the hell alone." I was crying now, enraged and terrified, willing to fight whatever forces were tormenting my child if only it would stop. Just as suddenly as it started, everything fell silent. My daughter blinked a few times, yawned, and lay back down while we stared at her in disbelief. I was still sobbing, more from relief and shock than anything else. It was so quiet, I almost wished for the noise again. Then a cricket chirped, softly at first, then louder. Finally, the forest returned to its normal nighttime symphony, and I collapsed back onto my bedding, exhausted. "What just happened?" I asked wearily. We all exchanged confused, frightened glances. "I don't know, but I think we should leave at first light," William said quietly. "I'm sorry, Fiona. You were right. We shouldn't have camped here." I nodded. "Let's just try to sleep. It's nearly 2:00 in the morning. We'll pack up when the sun rises." Everyone nodded, and we all lay back down. I held my sleeping daughter tightly. She was breathing steadily, absolutely fine, as if nothing had happened. I shivered, remembering her unearthly screams and that creepy singing. Finally, I started to doze. I jerked awake. Someone had slapped me. I waited for someone to say they'd swatted a midge off my leg, but no one spoke. "Did one of you just slap me?" I asked, my voice trembling. William turned over and shook his head. James and Olivia sat up and denied it as well. I looked down at my thigh and saw a red welt in the shape of a hand. My heart started pounding again as I remembered my anger, my screaming. Had I somehow offended whatever resided in this place? Something dripped onto the tent roof. For the briefest moment, I wondered if it had started raining. When I looked up and the others followed my gaze, I let out a tiny whimper of despair. Blood had hit the tent. All my worst nightmares flooded my mind. What was hanging over our tent? A mutilated animal. Something worse. "Is that?" William stuttered, pointing upward. I couldn't speak. My daughter stirred at this point. The silence was oppressive, almost suffocating. I didn't know what to do. At 3:37 in the morning, the forest erupted for the second time. As soon as the noise began, Emma awoke and started singing again. Everyone was screaming in terror, while I sat frozen in shock. I couldn't move. This wasn't happening. This was some kind of nightmare. Maybe if I remained perfectly still, it would all go away, and someone would appear to tell me how silly I looked, scared on some hidden camera show. But no one came, and no one was taking charge. "We're leaving," I yelled over everyone else. "Now, just shove everything in the bags. Don't leave anything behind." I started cramming miscellaneous items into backpacks. I couldn't help Emma. She just sat in the middle of the tent, rocking back and forth, singing and screaming, her eyes rolling wildly in their sockets. I tried not to look at her as we hastily packed. If I had, I'd probably have covered my ears and started singing a childhood song too. Once we finished packing the interior, the noises outside began to subside. We exited the tent anyway and started dismantling it. I kept watch for animals or anything worse while clutching Emma's arm. She continued singing softly. I wanted to tell her to stop, but I couldn't bring myself to shout at her. I loved her too much, and I couldn't believe this was happening to my child. Instead, I focused on the grim task of ensuring nothing would harm us as we prepared to leave. After we were packed, we started down the path back to the car. I could still feel eyes watching us. I stopped suddenly, remembering the rubbish by the stones, and cursed under my breath. I have to get that garbage. I promised not to leave it, and there's no way I'm breaking that promise now, I said grimly, terrified but determined. Surprisingly, Olivia went with me. We collected the litter and stuffed it into our backpacks before hurrying back to the others. William made sure the fire was completely extinguished, and we continued toward the car. The eerie silence accompanied us the entire way. Our unseen observers followed us until we were halfway back to the vehicle. Then Emma stopped and looked behind us. "Mummy," she murmured tiredly, "the ancient ones are watching." She had that faraway look in her eyes again, as if she wasn't quite present, and she looked exhausted. I nodded. "Wave goodbye," I muttered sarcastically. She waved. I tried not to shiver but failed. We threw our equipment into the car and piled in. Normal forest sounds surrounded us again. You could almost believe nothing had happened. All four of us rolled down our windows and shouted apologies as we drove away. We even felt a bit silly, terrified but silly. We were starving, so we stopped at a 24-hour service station. It was 4:00 in the morning. William stuck his head out the back window and asked the cashier, "Have you ever been camping near the stone circle down the road?" The woman shook her head. "No. Here's your food, sir." William looked her dead in the eye, grabbed our food, and said, "Don't. The place is haunted." I drove off as the woman stared at us in confusion. Olivia started laughing nervously, then James, then William, and finally me. We were all laughing hysterically, the adrenaline wearing off. We had survived. We didn't die. We felt ridiculous, but we never speak about that place. Every once in a while, my now 6-year-old daughter will ask if I remember the ancient ones, because she does. Rain, rain, go away. I work at a canning plant on the outskirts of Brisbane. It's one of the largest in Australia. The facility is pretty much a 24/7 operation. This summer, I landed an internship in the quality control lab, running food safety checks around the production and warehouse areas. I've stumbled across many strange things during my inspections. Rats feasting on their already dead mates, hidden drug paraphernalia, enormous cockroaches, and once I even walked in on 2 warehouse employees having a secret rendezvous behind a row of pallets stacked 35 feet high. None of these discoveries could have prepared me for what happened yesterday and this morning. 2 nights ago, a proper storm hit, the kind that makes you wonder if the world is ending. Gale force winds and torrential rain pummeled the facility. The night shift lost power about halfway through their work, so management decided to send everyone home and close until morning. By the time I arrived for my 7 o'clock shift, police cars, power company trucks, and emergency response vehicles surrounded the facility. Workers were gathered in the outside break area, smoking cigarettes while waiting for the all-clear to return to work. I made my way through the crowd, approached the plant manager, Ryan, and asked him what was happening. He explained that during the storm, the winds had knocked down a large eucalyptus tree, which crashed through the back wall of warehouse number 5. A solid 40-foot stretch of wall was completely destroyed, along with part of the ceiling and tons of canned food pallets. Ryan told me that once we received clearance, he and I would need to walk through all the warehouse areas to take inventory of what had been lost. Since warehouse number 5 was rarely used during the off-season, except for storing empty cans and forklifts, work wasn't canceled for the day. In the meantime, I could organize safety labels for the various cleaning chemicals kept in the front offices, which remained open. After about an hour of writing and attaching warning stickers to barrels of chemicals, Ryan came into the storage room and told me they were ready for the inspection. We needed to check the other 4 warehouses before allowing the remaining employees access. The inspection started routinely in the production areas and warehouse number 1. An old water bottle here, some dirty gloves there, nothing out of the ordinary. Warehouse number 2 is where things started to get weird. If you've ever been in a warehouse for canned products, you understand how creepy it can be to walk down the narrow paths between pallet stacks. Imagine 40-foot high stacks of silver, cans towering over a 2.5-foot wide path that's nearly pitch black even in full daylight. It's not a place for those with claustrophobia. We were about 20 feet down a path between 2 stacks when 5 or 6 cans suddenly rained down from above. Only one hit Ryan, but it struck the back of his head. Apart from a sharp grunt, he was immediately silenced. In all the chaos of the morning, Ryan had forgotten his hard hat, and I never thought to question the manager about his safety equipment. I rushed to Ryan's side. Blood was welling from a wound on his head, like a blooming red flower. I could hear more cans falling in the main walkways and in the small rows between other stacks, but I ignored them. My fingers instinctively went to his neck, searching for a pulse. After a few anxious seconds, I found it faint but present. I grabbed Ryan's radio and called for help. Thankfully, emergency workers heard the cans falling and came to investigate. They helped carry Ryan out from between the pallets and into an ambulance waiting at the nearest exit. At the time, I felt nothing but pity and guilt for Ryan. Now I see that he was the lucky one. After taking a moment to collect myself, I decided to continue the inspection. Using Ryan's radio, I called Marcus, the quality control manager, and asked him to help me. He responded that he was already in warehouse number 3. As I walked there, I noticed cans from various pallets scattered across the floor. This pattern of fallen cans continued all the way to warehouse number 3. I figured it must have been a family of possums, or maybe a few feral cats, chasing each other across the tops of the pallets. When I entered warehouse number 3, I immediately saw a large gathering of workers and volunteers standing near a collapsed row of pallets. Being in quality control, I couldn't help but wince. That was at least $30,000 worth of product ruined. As I approached, I noticed the workers muttering about something that clearly disturbed them. Marcus turned away from the group, holding a gallon-sized can in his hands, and rushed toward me. "What's going on here?" I asked. "Did they hear about Ryan? Did you find something?" Marcus stared at me with wide, frightened eyes. "Yes," he said quietly, and held up the gallon can. It was a standard container of beef stew. But as I took it from his hands, I saw 3 large puncture marks that had ripped through the metal on the other side. Claws. I looked back at the row of destroyed pallets. The can I held was probably the most intact of them all. Most looked like crumpled balls of tin foil, while others were torn open and completely emptied of their contents. "Crikey," I managed to stammer, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Whatever had opened these cans was huge and strong, very strong. I looked up at the tops of the surrounding pallet stacks, half hoping and half fearing what I might see. "Nothing." I sighed with momentary relief and asked Marcus if he could escort me through the rest of warehouses 3 and 4. He agreed, clearly glad to get away from warehouse 3. Besides more knockdown cans and the destruction at the back of warehouse 5, there wasn't much else to see. If something dangerous was inside the facility, it seemed to have primarily targeted the beef stew. Marcus and I helped the rest of the workers sort through the mess and assess product losses, which took up the remainder of my shift. I went home last night exhausted and passed out on my couch almost immediately. I woke up at 4:37 this morning to the sound of my phone ringing. I let it ring since I still had a few more hours until work. Shortly after it stopped, I heard it vibrate again, signaling that I had received a voicemail. Already awake, I decided to check it. I figured it was probably my mum worrying about me. Instead, I had 3 missed calls and a voicemail from Joey, a night shift quality control worker I knew from university. Given the previous day's events, I suspected something else had gone wrong. I couldn't make out much at first. It sounded like a typical pocket dial, but I could hear distant sounds, heavy breathing, hurried footsteps, the crash of cans hitting concrete floor, and then a bellowing roar. I've heard plenty of animals and weird noises before. Anyone who's heard a koala's mating call knows they can sound demonic. But that roar, that was one of the most hellish sounds I've ever heard. I turned up the volume on my phone and held it close to my ear, waiting for another roar. There was silence for about 10 seconds, and then I heard a person quietly sobbing. "Please help. Oh God, please," the voice begged. This pleading continued for several seconds before another roar erupted, nearly bursting my eardrum and causing me to drop the phone. Then the voicemail ended. I checked the clock again, 4:44 in the morning. I didn't have to be at work for another 2 hours, but Joey was obviously in serious trouble. I didn't stop to think. I just wanted to save my friend. Racing to the facility with my heart pounding in my ears, I had no idea what to expect. Flying into the closest parking space, I sprinted from my car and through the front offices. If I had taken my time, I would have noticed that less than half of the night shift's vehicles remained in the lot. All the rest had fled. When I entered the production area, I nearly ran back out. The power was completely out, except for the security lights. Those dim lights were enough to reveal the shimmer of red across the floor. Pools of blood slowly flowed into floor drains that were clogged with chunks of flesh, bone, and hair. I dropped to my knees and covered my mouth, trying not to scream, then vomited through my fingers. There was no escaping the smell. My body seemed frozen in place. Do I run? Do I scream? What do I do? My panic was broken by a series of gunshots from warehouse number 1, followed by screams that were abruptly silenced. I felt my bladder release slightly in fear. Guns don't stop this thing. What does? I heard the crash of cans as a pallet stack was knocked over. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted back to the storage room in the front offices. Once inside, I locked the doors and pulled out my phone. Joey didn't answer. I can only assume that whatever was in the facility got him during the voicemail I'd listened to. Out of sheer frustration, I threw my phone against the wall and it shattered. A crazed sob escaped me. Why did I do that? Why didn't I run away? Am I going to die here? I broke down in tears. A few minutes passed, and then I heard the rumble of trucks outside the facility and saw lights flash through the lone window. Cars, people, help. I stood up and looked out the window. Instead of police or the emergency response vehicles from before, I saw military trucks. One of them was a large olive-green armored vehicle with a man standing in the turret. I assume it was his voice that came over their loudspeakers. Attention. This is the Australian Defence Force. We are currently establishing a quarantine zone over this facility and the surrounding area. If there is anyone still alive in there, you will not be permitted to leave until we have completely confirmed the threat has been eliminated. He continued speaking, but I was too terrified to listen. I paced the room frantically, feeling like a dead man walking. If what I had seen of the creature's strength was any indication, a nuclear strike would probably be the only way to successfully remove this threat. I collapsed against the wall and buried my head in my hands. I remained in that position for a while, listening to the hustle and bustle of the military outside the building. I kept running through my options. Should I just end it all? Should I risk trying to escape? Could I somehow lure the beast to the soldiers? It wasn't until I looked up and across the room that I had an idea worth considering. Directly across from me were the barrels of sanitizing chemicals I had labeled in detail yesterday morning. How did I not think of that right away? We have two types of industrial cleaner, AmmoClean and ChloroPure. One of the biggest hazards of AmmoClean is that it's an oxidizing agent that can cause reactions with other chemicals. If AmmoClean is mixed with any chemicals containing chlorine, it reacts to release chlorine gas, deadly chlorine gas. Well, it just so happens that the main ingredient in ChloroPure is chlorine. Who would have guessed? And I had about 10 50-gallon drums of each cleaner in the storage room. I grabbed a crowbar, a couple of air masks used when cleaning old machine parts, and rolled 3 drums of each chemical onto a service cart. Taking a deep breath and trying to steady my trembling legs, I unlocked the door, pushed the cart out into the main hallway, and started toward the swing doors to production. Ramming through the doors, the drums almost spilled off the cart. But luckily, I maintained balance and continued to quickly push toward the quality control lab in the middle of production. I started to whistle and shout to attract the creature's attention, half expecting to be snatched up before I knew what was happening. There was no immediate response. I shouted louder and began banging the crowbar against one of the drums. Still nothing. The quality control lab is located in the center of the production area, with 2 steel doors leading in and no windows. I opened one of the doors, rolled the barrels off the cart and into the lab. The room was untouched. I tore my shirt off and stuffed it in the only floor drain. I put on 3 of the filter masks and pried off the top of 1 ChloroPure barrel with the crowbar, allowing the chemicals to spill onto the floor. Where is it? Does it know I'm trying to trap it? With no time to waste on negative thoughts, I opened the other 2 barrels of Chlorapure and added them to the pool of chemicals already a few inches deep. As I finished emptying the last drum, I heard a large crash and a subsequent growl from outside the door I hadn't entered through. "It's here." I positioned the ammo-clean drums and began emptying them into the pool. I grabbed a few damaged cans from the countertop and opened the door. A humanoid creature was perched atop the production machinery, standing out in the dim glow of the security lights. It was a hideous thing, with long, sinewy arms and legs. Pale gray skin stretched too tight over bulging veins and rippling muscles. Its hands had more finger than palm, with black claws extending several inches from each digit. The claws were digging into something resting out of the light to its left. It lifted the object to its mouth, which looked like a shark's, rows of razor-sharp yellow teeth pushing out and over one another. The teeth sank into the object and tore away. Blood sprayed the air briefly as I made out the shape in its claws. A human leg. Nervously, I glanced up from the leg. Its eyes met mine. Adrenaline coursed through my body. I weakly tossed one of the damaged cans at it, dropped the others, and dashed back into the lab. I heard it behind me, moving as swiftly as a shadow. The chlorine gas fumes were already thick in the air, as the floor had turned into a toxic soup that spilled out into the production area. Behind me, the door didn't have a chance to close. The creature held it open and stared at me with black, empty eye sockets. My eyes burned from the fumes, and my nose was beginning to sting. I screamed with ferocity and kicked one of the empty drums at it with all the energy I had left. It leaped toward me with a matching shriek, caught the drum in midair, and then crashed into the chemical pool below. The far door slammed shut. I took my chance and quickly exited through the door at my back, slamming it closed. My only hope was that the steel doors would contain the creature. My eyes burned uncontrollably. I couldn't breathe properly through the multiple masks. I heard agonizing screams and yelps coming from behind the doors as my head began to spin. I did it. I killed it. Then everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I was in the back of an ambulance. A military officer and what I assumed was a government scientist were quietly discussing something. They continued their hushed conversation for a few minutes until they realized I was awake. I was hooked up to oxygen and various monitoring equipment, but I managed to croak out a question. What was it? The scientist looked at me with curious eyes. We don't know for certain. We suspect it might have been something that escaped from a classified research facility during the storm. But what we do know is that it had a particular taste for human flesh. He paused. And that you managed to kill it. The look I gave him must have conveyed my disbelief, because the officer gave me a reassuring nod and said, "That's right, mate. You stopped it. Now get some rest before you try playing hero again." I closed my eyes until we arrived at the hospital. When I woke in my bed, I searched through news channels for any report on the carnage, but there was nothing. I started to reflect on everything that had happened. Poor Ryan and Joey. I wondered how many others had been killed. Then I remembered what the scientist had said in the ambulance. The creature had developed a craving for human flesh. I bolted upright in my bed. If it was hungry for people, why did it go for the beef stew cans first? I never thought I would regret it. It was stupid, really. I was standing in the queue to buy lunch at Winfield Academy, one of London's oldest private schools. My friend Oliver came over and said in a Darth Vader voice, "I will trade you a lunch ticket for your immortal soul." I told him to shut up, so he said it again, this time emphasizing immortal soul to make it sound more dramatic. "Seriously, your immortal soul, and you don't have to wait in this ridiculous queue." "Fine," I said, grabbed the ticket from his hand, and walked over to the lunch counter. He followed me. "Hey, I have another one. Do you think Eliza might give me her immortal soul?" I didn't think she would. Eliza would just wrinkle her nose and ignore him. "No, try Hannah. I bet you could at least get her to kiss you for it if you're lucky." I watched him head over to Hannah, and after she shyly kissed his cheek, she followed him to the lunch counter, ticket in hand. Behind his back, he gave me a thumbs up. Oliver moved away from London not long after that, and who really keeps track of primary school friends? No one. I grew up, went to university, got married, had a daughter, and never thought about trading my immortal soul again. Then, one rainy evening, I was driving my family on the M25 motorway and dozed off for just a second. In that brief moment, we ran into slowed traffic, and I was behind a lorry. The last thing I remember is my wife screaming my name. I swerved, but not soon enough. My car hit the back of the lorry on the passenger side. My wife and my daughter, who was sitting behind my wife on the passenger side, were killed instantly. The next thing I remember is lying on the wet tarmac with paramedics around me, trying to revive me. It was cold. I was thirsty, and bright lights hurt my eyes. I remember someone putting an oxygen mask over my face, and everything went dark as I lost consciousness. Then I remember waking up here. I wasn't in a hospital, but I was drifting in and out of awareness. The memories from this period are fragmentary, almost like an old silent film, but less coherent. Every so often, someone would stand over me, but they were a blur, flickering in and out of my perception. As I recovered and became more stable, no one came at all. I don't know how long it was from my arrival to when my eyes were finally able to focus, but the first thing I was truly conscious of was the sound of running water and the metallic clinking of what I would soon realize were surgical instruments being cleaned and sterilized. "Things are going well, Thomas," said a calm voice I didn't recognize. "I'm sorry about your wife and daughter. There was nothing I could do for them. They were dead for too long before they were brought to me." He walked over, and because it was difficult to hold my head up, the first thing I remember about him was his hands. It was the only detail I could see clearly. He was drying them on a white disposable towel. They were large with flat fingers, and coarse blonde hair covered the back of them and his forearms thickly. "But you were different. After all, you sold me your soul. I like to think that perhaps because of that day, my will for you to live overrode your desire to die with your family. Oliver." I heard him chuckle softly and felt that he was pleased. "You're fortunate to have befriended such a brilliant doctor so early in life." It was comforting to have him there, and while he would leave during the day, at night he would come back, look after me, and keep me company. It turns out I was in his basement, which he had roughly modified for my care. He brought down his favorite armchair and a television, and in the evenings, We would watch programs, or he would read to me from his armchair as I recovered and slowly grew stronger. One night while he was reading, he stopped rather abruptly and became thoughtful. Instead of asking what he was thinking about, which was my first instinct, I asked how he had known about my accident, how long he had been back in the London area, and why he hadn't contacted me sooner. He seemed very pleased with my questions. "I actually have a confession to make, Thomas," he told me. "Ever since that day back in year 6 when you sold your soul, I felt responsible for you. You and Hannah both. I followed your lives loosely. I felt tied to you, but you never contacted me." He sighed. "I never had time for social calls. I've always had bigger plans." And then he read until I fell asleep. A few nights later, I was well enough to sit up. He asked if I'd like some tea. Sitting up and drinking tea sounded like a miracle to me. When I asked for Earl Grey, he smiled, added a bag of tea to a mug, handed it to me, and sat in his chair. "How long has Earl Grey been your favorite?" he asked. I thought about it, then frowned. "Actually, I've never really liked tea before," I admitted. "So since now." We both found that funny and laughed, the first time I'd laughed in weeks. "Earl Grey has been my favorite since my second year at Oxford," he said. He was silent for a minute, and I knew he was thinking about wording whatever he was going to say next very carefully. But I was getting sleepy. The tea was so relaxing. I could see why people enjoyed it. "Thomas," he said, "I save lives every day. I save good people, people like you. If I could have, I would have saved your wife and daughter if it would have been in my power." Despair, pain, and guilt flooded over me. I'd been so content with Oliver that I hadn't thought about them in weeks. But I was getting sleepier too. "Thomas, you do understand I could have saved them if I had been more powerful, don't you?" I nodded weakly. "Thomas," he said, "those many years ago I asked you for something. But since you didn't really believe I wanted it, I didn't get what I needed, not completely. I'm going to ask you for it again. I'm sure I don't need to explain our connection now that my thoughts are your thoughts, my tastes are your tastes, and my will can be imposed on you. Now that you really see what I can do, now that you know how important I can be to people, can you deny me the power to save more lives? To use a greater force to impose my will? To do great things?" I was so sleepy. My eyelids were growing heavy. "Thomas, I can still save you. Will you help me do great things? Can I have your soul?" The room was growing dark, and my eyelids were closing as I consented. Since then, I've helped him do the same thing to Hannah and countless others. Every time I watch the process, then the ritual, I see less and less resistance as he grows stronger. Everything he does is remarkable. He's a brilliant man, but not everything he does is good. Some people die. My only comfort is that someday he will die, and someone will collect his soul. But that thought grows weaker with every addition he makes to his collection. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark basement laboratory where I now assist him, I swear I can hear the whispers of the souls he's gathered, crying out for release. And I wonder, will mine join them when he no longer needs this body he's kept alive? My story begins several years ago. I'm only sharing this now because until recently, I was able to convince myself it was just my imagination. But I can't keep pretending anymore. Maybe you can tell me what this was. I was 14 years old. It was a Saturday in late October in our small Colorado town. The mountains were visible from our backyard, their peaks already dusted with early snow. My dad was on a bike ride, and my mom was having lunch with a friend, so I was home alone. Being daytime, I wasn't worried about it. I was just sitting in the kitchen, browsing the internet on my laptop. You know, typical teenager stuff. But then I heard a noise. It wasn't some scary paranormal scream or anything. It just sounded like our printer running, which was strange because we usually kept our printer turned off unless we needed to use it. I couldn't remember my mom or dad turning on the printer that day, and I definitely hadn't done it. I froze in my seat, listening intently to that sound. I can't even properly describe what sound a printer makes. It's a sort of weird mechanical chugging. I waited for it to stop. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Even though I couldn't think why something would be printing, I figured whatever it was would eventually finish. It didn't. The noise kept going. To give you some context about the layout of our house, it's a single-story ranch-style home. The kitchen and living room are to the left of the entrance hall, and the bedroom wing with the home office, where the printer is located, is to the right. Even though the printer was basically on the other side of the house, I could hear it ridiculously clearly. It just kept chugging and chugging. At this point, I was genuinely terrified. I couldn't even go back to my room, because that would require walking past the office where the printer was. I didn't dare investigate what was making that noise. But after another few minutes of painful anxiety, what choice did I have? It's just a printer, I told myself as I slowly rose from my seat. Nevertheless, I armed myself with the biggest kitchen knife I could find. Looking back, what good was a knife going to do against a printer? I edged down the hallway toward the office, but when I reached the entrance hall, the noise suddenly stopped. I think the sudden halt of the chugging startled me more than the noise originally had. I straightened up. I had been crouching like an idiot and started walking normally toward the office. But the absence of that noise had given me a false sense of security. I had almost reached the door of the office when I felt something so indescribably horrible. It wasn't a chill. It wasn't goosebumps. It was this terrible burning sensation throughout my entire body. My ears felt like they were on fire. My stomach dropped, and my vision blurred for a second. I ran like hell down the hallway and frantically dialed my mother's cell number. Why I didn't call 911, I don't know. I guess I just wanted to hear a familiar voice. But when she picked up, I didn't even know what to say. What could I say that didn't sound ridiculous? Mom, I'm scared because I think the printer turned itself on. So instead, I hysterically told her that I thought someone was breaking into the house. My mom's friend ended up calling 911 while I was still on the phone with her. She told me to get out of the house as fast as possible and stay on the line with her. I ran outside, still clutching the kitchen knife. That terrible burning sensation had subsided, but I was still shaking badly. Neighbors started to gather outside as the police car pulled up. I'm sure I looked insane, death gripping a kitchen knife with tears streaming down my face. 2 police officers went into my house and came out less than 5 minutes later. They said everything was clear and there was no sign of a break-in. They asked me a few questions, none of which I could properly answer because I was still so shaken up. One officer waited with me until my mom came home. I refused to go back into the house alone, and the two of us went in together once my mom arrived. With my mom at home, I finally had the courage to check the office and see if it was really the printer making those noises. It must have been the printer, because the police said there were no signs of a break-in. With bated breath, I peered into the office and stared intently at the printer. The power button was unlit. It wasn't on. I wasn't sure if this scared me more. If it had been on, then who had turned it on? But since it was off, what had been making those noises? I kept myself busy for the rest of the evening, trying to push it out of my mind. I'd pretty much succeeded, and when I went to my bedroom to finally get some sleep, I was feeling normal again. I went into my room and turned on the light. That's when I saw the most terrifying thing I think I've ever seen in my life. On my bed sat a single piece of white printer paper. It wasn't folded. It didn't have anything written on it. It was just a piece of harmless paper. The thing is, I hadn't been in my room all day, and I would definitely have remembered if I had put a blank piece of paper on my bed. My parents don't go in my room, so I know it wasn't them. I didn't care what the police said now. I knew that someone or something had been in my house. But the scariest part, I think, is that whatever it was didn't leave a message. Why would a ghost turn on a printer and then leave a blank piece of paper? What does that even mean? I threw away the piece of paper immediately, but that didn't stop me from being terrified. I slept in my parents' room that night, claiming I'd had a nightmare. Nothing like this happened again for years, and so I tried to pretend it was just the printer malfunctioning and my imagination running wild. Maybe my mom had printed something earlier and forgotten about it. Maybe the paper was already there, and I just hadn't noticed. But last week, I came home to my apartment after a late shift at the hospital, where I now work as a nurse. I live alone in a small place outside Denver. As I was setting my keys down on the table, I heard a familiar sound from my home office. The mechanical chugging of a printer. My blood ran cold as I slowly walked toward the room. The printer was still and silent when I entered, its power light off. But there on my desk was a single sheet of white paper. This time it wasn't blank. In the center, in a font I don't have installed on my computer, were 3 words: remember your soul. I don't own a printer anymore. I threw it out that night. But sometimes, when I'm trying to fall asleep, I swear I can hear the mechanical chugging coming from somewhere inside my walls. And I'm afraid that one day I'll find another piece of paper. And I'm even more afraid of what it might say. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you? Maybe you turn around quickly, scanning the room for a threat you cannot find. Or perhaps you're in the shower and close your eyes, letting the water run over your face to wash off the soap. You open them quickly, don't you? Expecting something to be there. Then you feel silly when you realize nobody's watching you. I'm here to tell you that you are not silly. Your fear is not irrational. There is someone watching you. Always. They're called the Shadow Ones. Your Shadow One is a force of your own creation. We all have one. It's a collection of negative energy that grows stronger over time. When you were 1 year old and hit your mother for the first time, your shadow one grew stronger. When you were 5 and refused to share a toy in kindergarten, your shadow one grew stronger. At 10, when you lied about breaking a neighbor's window, your shadow one grew stronger. You have created your own worst nightmare. In our universe, everything must have a balance. It's a basic law of life. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. That's where the light ones come in. Your light one is also a force of your own creation. We all have one. It's a collection of positive energy that grows stronger over time. When you were 1 and hugged your mother, your light one grew stronger. When you were 5 and gave your favorite toy to a crying classmate, your light one grew stronger. When you were 10 and helped your elderly neighbor carry groceries, your light one grew stronger. You have created your own protector. For most of us, our shadow one and light one exist in equal strength. That's why you feel your shadow one sometimes watching and waiting for a chance to strike. But it never comes. Because your light one is there, protecting you. Many people can live full and happy lives without any knowledge that these forces exist because of the balance their light one maintains. Of course, some have figured out that these forces exist. Ever heard of your guardian angel from Christian mythology? Sound familiar? But this balance is rare. Far rarer than you'd think. I was 6 years old when my parents died in a house fire in northern Michigan. I was staying at my grandmother's house that night, which is why I survived. That's when it began. You see, my light one used up too much energy protecting me that night. It threw off the balance so that my shadow one became stronger. For some of us unlucky ones, the cause of the imbalance is never really known. Maybe they were sick on a day when their car would have crashed. Or perhaps they turned down a job offer that would have led to their deaths. But in the end, whether the cause is known or unknown, the result is the same. It began when I was 6. Because I was so young, my shadow one was still relatively weak, so it manifested in small ways. A teddy bear would be found in the bathtub when I'd left it on my bed. Plates would inexplicably shatter. Small things. As I grew older, it grew stronger. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of my shadow one in the form of a tall figure in a dark coat from the corner of my eye. Other times, the heavy oak dining table would be found completely flipped upside down. As I grew older, it grew stronger. I would wake up to deep scratches across my legs. My stuffed animals would be ripped apart at the seams, their stuffing covering my floor. As I grew older, it grew stronger. When I was 8, my beloved grandmother grew sick and died. She had been my guardian, my mother, and my friend. I was devastated. From there, I was transferred from foster home to foster home. In each case, something would go horribly wrong. My first foster parents, devout Baptists, declared that I was cursed after dinner plates began flying off shelves and pets began to die mysteriously. In my second foster home, my foster parents became convinced that I was possessed after chairs began throwing themselves against walls during the night. In my third foster home, I was declared a violent delinquent after my foster mother awoke to deep gashes on her back. In my fifth foster home, a therapeutic placement for troubled children, my foster father, a healthy 46-year-old, died of a sudden heart attack while watching me draw. I was finally placed in a juvenile correctional facility in Wisconsin, and things quieted down for a while. 2 weeks ago, I was released into a halfway program. I was given my own apartment in their special facility in Milwaukee. Again, things started small. I would come home to find objects moved around. Pillows that had been lying on the bed now rested on my kitchen floor. And then it escalated. Plates would randomly fall out of cabinets and break. A dark form would appear in my peripheral vision, then disappear when I turned to look. Something was constantly watching me. And then it escalated. Entire chairs would throw themselves across the room. Neighbors complained about the noise. The healthy cat who lived in the apartment across from mine died without any apparent cause. And then it escalated. I awoke this morning to deep scratches across my chest, forming a pattern that looked almost like words in a language I couldn't understand. I know what is coming next. I know what the next step is, and I have accepted it. In a few days' time, it will escalate again, and I, a healthy 19-year-old, will be found dead. The medical examiner will be baffled. The halfway house staff will be investigated. Policies will be changed. But nothing will stop what's coming for me. I have come to this site because everything here must be taken as true. And I'm begging that you take my story as truth as well. Not just because you have to, but because it is. Learn from my story. Look both ways before you cross the street. Don't do drugs. Cherish the ones you love. Live life carefully. But most of all, hope and pray that your energy stays balanced. Hope and pray that you don't end up like me. Because your shadow one is always watching, waiting for your light one to weaken just enough for it to make its move. And when it does, it won't be quick, and it won't be merciful. It will be like watching yourself destroy everything you love, piece by piece, until there's nothing left, not even you. Years have passed, and my memory of each passing second never falters. Her name was Rachel, and she was the one. I was the first to tell her that I loved her with every fiber of my being. With tears glistening in her hazel eyes, she replied, "And I you." It didn't take long for us to become inseparable. We moved into our own apartment in Seattle, overlooking Puget Sound, married under cherry blossoms in spring, and talked endlessly about our future together. She was my best friend, my confidant, everything I'd ever dreamed of in a partner. We could talk for hours without exhausting our conversation. We often discussed our thoughts on mortality and what either of us would do if tragedy struck. I would always smile sadly and tell her that I'd find a way to haunt her, to knock books off shelves or flicker the lights, just so she'd know I was still with her. Rachel, on the other hand, would always say the same thing. I would find a way to tell you that I love you, not in dreams or whispers, but in a way you'd never forget. It was strangely comforting to hear, even as we laughed it off and changed the subject to happier things. After 7 years of blissful marriage, it happened. A severe electrical storm hit our area. A power line had fallen during the tempest, and Rachel, being the compassionate person she was, stopped her car to check if she could help direct traffic away from the danger. There was no way of knowing that a live wire was submerged. In a puddle of rainwater, she stepped in. I was told that she died instantly, that she felt no pain. I looked up similar incidents, while I was able to go a minute without crying. It wasn't painless. It was excruciating, and the wrong way for someone as gentle and caring as Rachel to leave this world. There were no more stars in the night sky after that. It took months for me to function normally. I even worried that I would never be the same person again. I started reading every book on grief and the afterlife that I could find. Nothing brought comfort. I was alone, reading and finding nothing. I never found hope. Crying myself to sleep became my nightly ritual. Then one rain-soaked night in November, I felt her presence. I knew I was asleep, but the sudden burst of hope that flooded through me was enough to power an entire city. In my dream, I stood on the rocky shore of a misty lake. A dense, verdant forest surrounded the water on all sides. Everywhere I looked, I saw life flourishing, birds, deer, wildflowers. That feeling, though, my beautiful Rachel was here, and I needed to find her. I ran to where my heart pulled me, and there she was, standing in a shaft of golden sunlight that somehow pierced the heavy clouds above. Her perfect smile beckoned me closer, drawing me toward her like gravity. I stumbled forward, not with grace but with desperate need, tripping over my own feet. I crawled the last few yards to her, barely able to see through the tears that flooded my vision. At this point in the dream, I was sobbing uncontrollably at her feet. She knelt beside me and whispered my name. Every ounce of sadness, depression, hopelessness, all of it faded away. I couldn't let her see me like this, so I said the only thing I could think of, the only thing that needed to be true. I'll be with you soon, okay, Rachel? I love you. As if telling the love of my life who had passed on that I loved her wasn't the hardest thing I'd ever had to do, the dream began to change. This perfect sanctuary, this peaceful resting place for my love, started to wither and fade. I tried to grab her, to take her with me, but she and the world around us turned to mist and disappeared. There was nothing but the dim light coming from the clock on my bedside table. I was enraged. I was heartbroken. I was alone again. Why did I have to continue living without her? Why couldn't I trade places with her? As I screamed into my pillow, wanting everything to end, I heard it, plain as day and unmistakable. And you. The complete essence of my soul calmed instantly. I could see the stars reappearing in the night sky through my window. I could see the forest with all of its birds, rabbits, and deer. I could see her smiling, telling me to cherish this life, and when it was over, to return to her. 3 days later, while cleaning out a drawer I had been avoiding, I found a small box I didn't recognize. Inside was a custom-made glass pendant containing a tiny dried cherry blossom, like those from our wedding day, and a note in Rachel's handwriting. For when you need to remember that love transcends everything. And I had never seen this pendant before. Rachel had never given it to me. The drawer had been emptied completely in the weeks after her death, as I searched frantically for photos and mementos. The pendant now hangs around my neck, and on particularly difficult nights, it seems to grow warm against my skin. Sometimes when I'm between wakefulness and sleep, I swear I can hear her whisper, and you. Her name is Rachel, and she is the love of my life. This happened a few years ago when I was in college. Our school wasn't large or particularly well known. A small liberal arts college tucked away in the hills of western Massachusetts. The campus had two distinct sections. The main campus housed the administrative buildings and freshman dorms along the central quad, while what we called the Grove, located across a small creek about a quarter-mile away, contained the upper-class dormitories and academic departments. The Grove was where I studied. It had two main buildings, one for humanities and one for sciences. The science building was always bustling with activity, experiments running at all hours, study groups in every corner. Our humanities building, on the other hand, was eerily quiet. With enrollment declining in liberal arts, the classrooms were often half empty. Many rooms went completely unused, their lights permanently off, doors always closed. The hallways in our building were somber and silent. My footsteps would echo as I walked from class to class, the sound bouncing off the walls in a way that made me constantly feel like someone was following me. I know our building didn't seem like what a college should be, but the tuition was affordable. I was on scholarship and only needed to maintain good grades. The campus was just 20 minutes from my apartment, so I had no reason to complain. One Tuesday afternoon, while waiting for my next class, I grew bored of reviewing my notes and decided to explore the fourth floor. I'd heard rumors about an old art gallery that used to be housed up there before budget cuts. As I was climbing the stairs, I saw Professor Winters wearing a distinctive crimson blouse. I paused and smiled at her. "Good afternoon, Professor." I expected her to reply, but she didn't. She didn't even smile or acknowledge me. She just continued walking down the stairs, passing by me without sparing a glance. It was as if I were invisible. I became concerned. Maybe she was upset with me, but for what? I hadn't done anything wrong in her class. I decided to try catching her attention again. "Professor, are you okay?" No response. It was like she didn't hear me. I frowned. She didn't seem like herself at all. Weird, but not weird enough to keep me thinking about it for long. I shrugged it off and continued exploring the fourth floor. When I passed by the faculty lounge 15 minutes later, I heard a familiar voice. It was loud and animated, unmistakably Professor Winters. I glanced through the open door and saw her behind a desk, enthusiastically telling a story to my classmate Zoe, who sat directly in front of her. When Professor Winters saw me, she smiled broadly and greeted me with her usual warmth. "Rebecca, come join us." You can imagine my confusion. I had just seen her on the stairwell minutes ago. How could she have been here the whole time? "Professor, did you go downstairs a little while ago?" I asked, puzzled. She looked surprised by the question, but answered without hesitation. "No, why do you ask? I just saw you a few minutes ago. You were taking the stairs. I greeted you, but you ignored me." She frowned slightly. "I've been here for the past hour at least." She glanced at Zoe for confirmation. Zoe nodded. "We've been discussing my thesis the whole time." Nobody left the room. That was when I noticed Professor Winters' clothing. The woman in the stairwell had been wearing a crimson blouse. The professor sitting before me was wearing navy blue. A chill ran down my spine. I asked the obvious question, though I already knew the answer. Then who was the woman I saw on the stairs? Both Zoe and Professor Winters stared at me silently. I opened my mouth and closed it again, unsure what else to say. The professor's face had grown serious, almost pale. "What exactly did you see, Rebecca?" she asked quietly. "I saw you, or someone who looked exactly like you, walking down the stairs." She was wearing a crimson blouse. I said hello, but she completely ignored me. Professor Winters and Zoe exchanged a glance that made my stomach drop. "You're not the first student to mention this," Professor Winters said after a moment. "There have been similar reports over the years." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press for details, though my mind was racing with questions. The three of us sat in uncomfortable silence, until Zoe awkwardly mentioned she needed to get to her next class. I seized the opportunity to leave as well, mumbling something about needing to prepare for a presentation. For days afterward, I found myself scanning the hallways, half expecting to see the crimson-clad doppelganger again. I told myself it must have been another professor who resembled Professor Winters, or maybe just a trick of the light in those dimly lit stairwells. 2 weeks went by without incident, and I had almost managed to convince myself that there was a logical explanation for what I'd seen. Then it happened again. I was studying late in the humanities building. Most classes had ended for the day, and the building was quieter than usual. I saw Marcus, a teaching assistant for the history department, walking down the far end of the third-floor corridor. I was about to call out to him to ask about an assignment when I noticed something odd about his movement. He was walking stiffly, almost mechanically, and staring straight ahead. "Marcus," I called, but he continued walking as if he hadn't heard me. I jogged to catch up with him, but when I turned the corner, he was gone. The hallway was a straight shot, with no doors for at least 30 feet. He couldn't have simply disappeared. Confused, I headed to the history department office on the second floor. To my shock, I found Marcus sitting at his desk, surrounded by papers. "Have you been here all evening?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He looked up, surprised. "Since about 4, yeah. Been drowning in these essays." I checked my watch. It was 7:30 p.m. "Is everything okay, Rebecca?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, laughing at what he thought was just a figure of speech. "I saw you upstairs just now." On the third floor, his smile faded. "That's not possible. I've been here for hours. Someone who looked exactly like you was walking down the hallway." I called out, but they didn't respond. Marcus's face drained of color. Which way were they headed? Toward the north stairwell. He stood up abruptly, knocking over a stack of papers. "Stay here," he ordered, then rushed out of the office. He returned 10 minutes later, visibly shaken. "What's going on, Marcus?" I demanded. "This isn't the first time. 2 weeks ago I saw Professor Winters, but it wasn't really her." Marcus sank into his chair. "They're called reflections," he said quietly. "At least, that's what Professor Kendrick in folklore called them before he retired. They've been seen in this building for decades. What are they? No one knows for sure. Some think they're echoes of people who spent significant time here. Others believe they're something else entirely, entities that take on familiar appearances. Are they dangerous? Not that we know of." But he hesitated. "People who see their own reflection often experience bad luck afterward. Sometimes worse." I felt a chill run through me. "Has anyone seen their own?" Marcus nodded grimly. Professor Kendrick did, 3 days before he had his stroke. In the weeks that followed, the sightings around campus increased dramatically. Students and faculty reported seeing doubles of people who were demonstrably elsewhere at the time. Always in the humanities building, always unresponsive when addressed. The most disturbing incident happened a month later. A first-year student claimed to have seen me walking backwards down the main staircase at midnight, even though I had been at my apartment across town. When she called my name, she said my double turned around, but the face wasn't mine. It was blank, featureless, as if someone had erased all my identifying characteristics. The administration eventually addressed the rumors, attributing the sightings to stress, poor lighting, and mass suggestion. They brought in extra counselors and installed brighter lights in the hallways. The sightings continued. I started avoiding staying late in the humanities building. I took different routes to my classes, always sticking to crowded areas. But the feeling of being watched never left me. Then came the morning when Zoe rushed up to me before class, her face ashen. "People saw you yesterday," she whispered urgently. 3 different people, in 3 different places at the same time. My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I was home sick yesterday." "I know," she said. "I called you, remember? But they're sure it was you. One in the library, one in the west hallway, and one standing outside Professor Winter's office for hours without moving." That afternoon, I went to Professor Winter's office. She wasn't there, but taped to her door was a notice announcing the cancellation of all her classes due to a family emergency. When she returned a week later, she looked years older. The rumor was that her identical twin sister, whom no one knew existed, had died suddenly. I never told her that on the day of her sister's death, I saw a woman in a crimson blouse standing in the rain outside my apartment building, staring up at my window. A woman with Professor Winter's face. I transferred to another college the following semester. I told everyone it was for financial reasons, but the truth was I couldn't bear the thought of turning a corner and coming face to face with myself. 3 years have passed since then. I live in a different state now, working at a publishing house in a high-rise downtown. Sometimes when I'm working late and the office is empty, I catch glimpses of movement in the reflective surfaces of windows and computer screens, familiar silhouettes that shouldn't be there. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the elevator, I swear I can hear footsteps behind me, perfectly matching my own, step for step. But I never turn around to look. Some reflections, I've learned, are better left unseen. I'm not sure if I can sleep tonight, so I thought I might as well share today's events with you. I'm currently struggling to make sense of it all. I suppose I should begin by laying down the basic facts. I'm an 18-year-old senior living in a small, remote New England town nestled in the mountains of Vermont. The fact that we're situated within dense forests means we're a good hour away from any significant civilization. Consequently, the 300 or so townspeople are pretty much the only people I interact with most of the year. The town itself is basically just a scattering of houses with a post office, a couple of shops, small churchyard, and a pub all arranged around what is effectively the town center. The only reason I have internet access is through a rather expensive satellite connection. But I'm grateful for it, especially tonight. Anyway, back to today. It started as any usual Saturday starts. Waking up at 9, helping my parents at our family's maple syrup operation for a couple of hours, and then relaxing with a handful of other local teens for lunch. There were 5 of us all together, lounging on a patch of field at the edge of town. This was our routine. We'd bring sandwiches, thermoses of coffee or hot chocolate, and sometimes a few beers carefully hidden in Ryan's backpack until the right moment. After we finished our sandwiches, Ryan hastily passed cans to the others in turn. Then it struck me that someone was missing. Andrew wasn't with us. At 15, he was the youngest of our group, and he was usually the most eager when it came to drinking. Likely because he was trying to prove himself to us older kids. "Where's Andrew?" I asked. It wasn't sinister at that point. I just assumed he was busy, and that the others knew why he wasn't there. "Good question. Not sure. Didn't see him this morning," said Ellie. An attractive 17-year-old with long auburn hair and bright green eyes that seemed to catch the sunlight perfectly. I'll admit I've had a crush on her for years. She's Andrew's sister, so her vague answer puzzled me. "You mean he wasn't there when you got up?" I asked, intrigued. "Well, he's usually up and out of the house before me, so that's not unusual or anything. He might have had to finish some farm work off," she replied with a shrug. "Yeah, that's probably it," I agreed and thought no more of it for the time being. Ellie and Andrew's father had died a few years previously, leaving Andrew to mature rapidly, generally taking on a large share of the work around their family's farm. At about 1 in the afternoon, we packed up our things, discarding the empty cans in our usual spot behind some bushes. Then we all headed back to our homes. I asked Ellie if I could stop by to see if Andrew was around, as I felt I should give him the beer we'd saved for him. She let me into their farmhouse. Mrs. Harrison, their mother, was sitting at the kitchen table with an old man who had his back to us. She shared her daughter's attractive features, but her usually bright eyes looked solemn today. "Hi, Mrs. Harrison. Is Andrew around?" I asked. As I said this, a look of pain crossed her face. The old man turned toward me on his stool. I could see now that it was Mr. Weber, the oldest man I've ever met. He must be well into his 90s, but he still maintains a sharpness and vigor in his eccentric personality. According to local lore, he fled from Austria during the Second World War, as his political views opposed those of the Nazi regime. After living in several countries, he settled in our town some 15 years ago. As a respected community elder, he also runs the neighborhood watch along with his son Martin. His presence here seemed odd, and I could see through the deep lines of his weathered face that something was wrong. "James, it's good to see you. Please sit down," he said with that distinctive accent that balanced uneasily between Austrian and Vermont inflections. "What's going on?" Ellie asked, suddenly tense. "Sit down, both of you," he instructed. We did as he said, exchanging worried glances. "Andrew has gone missing," he stated flatly. "Your mother and I have discussed this thoroughly, Ellie, and we believe he may have run away." "What?" Ellie looked stunned. Her mother was blinking rapidly, clearly trying to hold back tears. "Why would he run away? Why on earth would he do that?" Ellie was clearly dumbfounded by this news, as was I. People do sometimes leave our town without warning, especially younger residents who grow tired of the isolated lifestyle. But this was completely unexpected from Andrew. Didn't he leave a note or anything? I asked, trying to understand the situation. No, nothing, mister, Weber replied. However, his clothes are gone, as well as some food, money, and other supplies, so there's no reason to suspect that he is in danger. I know this is shocking for you both, he continued, but you must remain calm. I will do my best to get in contact with him. We should call the police, Ellie said firmly. There is very little they could do, Ellie, mister, Weber replied. He could be anywhere by now, and there's no point sending them to search the mountains. I fear it would be fruitless. He's right, Ellie, Mrs. Harrison added, her voice strained. Your brother has made his decision to leave. We have to respect it. The best we can hope for is a phone call or a letter. He might return soon enough, mister. Weber then rose slowly from his stool, bowing his gray head to each of us in turn before making his way out. As he was about to leave, I caught him looking back through the door at Mrs. Harrison as she began to sob. There was something in his expression, a slight smile that sent a chill through me. I stayed for a few minutes to comfort Ellie and her mother, then returned home to explain the situation to my parents. Now I'm here in bed, unable to sleep and writing this down. I think there's more to this than what we're being told. It was that smile, mister. Weber flashed before he left. Something is wrong with this whole situation. I'm going to use this as a sort of journal to document what happens. I'll keep you updated. Day 2, I had a disturbing dream last night. Someone was throwing rocks at my bedroom window. I got up to open it and saw Andrew standing there in the moonlight, naked with stitches and scars covering his entire body. I shouted out to him, and he just smiled, the same smile that Mr. Weber had given Mrs. Harrison. Then I woke up in a cold sweat. The dream really shook me. I can't shake this overwhelming sense that Mr. Weber knows more than he's letting on. I'm planning to investigate. I went over to the Harrisons' house again and talked to Ellie. She's not handling this well. She can't understand why Andrew would disappear so suddenly without a word to anyone, especially her. I've convinced her to help me do some digging. It seems I'm not the only one who felt uneasy about Mr. Weber's involvement. Ellie mentioned that her mom heard something outside their house the night before Andrew went missing and swears she saw Mr. Weber walking around their property when she looked out the window. I'm not sure whether to tell Ellie about my dream. It would probably be too upsetting for her right now. We decided to take a look around Mr. Weber's house. We knew that he and his son are usually out in the afternoon. They tend to take long walks in the mountains, so we thought we'd search for any clues about Andrew. The Weber house is one of the largest in town, situated opposite the church. Its grounds are largely overgrown with tangled vines of ivy hanging over the old brickwork, and tattered flags representing some European country I don't recognize. We found an open window around the back and climbed through. I've been in this house a few times over the years, as Mr. Weber often hosted community events, usually after weddings or funerals. We were in a small but rather grand dining area dusty but still impressive. A large oak table dominated the center, and around the room were various bookshelves. I studied them briefly. The books were largely related to medical practices, and I remembered that my father once mentioned that Weber had trained as a surgeon in Vienna. There were also several books on World War II, which seemed expected given his history. We decided to search the floor separately, but after about 10 minutes, neither of us found anything significant regarding Andrew. The only disturbing item I discovered was a small bookmark with a red swastika in its center. On it were the words Der Arzt, which I didn't understand. Why someone who supposedly fled the Nazi regime would have a swastika bookmark is beyond me. Ellie also noted a machete hanging in his bedroom, which was engraved with German words, Schneiden von Fleisch. Again, I don't know what that means, but a framed machete with German inscriptions is certainly unsettling. I couldn't help but think of my dream with Andrew, covered in scars and stitches, when I saw it. We soon left the house, both of us more confused than before. Now we're sitting in Andrew's room, searching for any clue he might have left behind about where he was going or why. So far, we've found nothing, just normal teenage stuff. I've noticed something else strange, though. Pinecrest Academy, our school, seems unusually quiet for a Saturday when clubs and sports teams usually practice. Ellie mentioned that several other students haven't been seen around town lately. Could there be a connection? I'll try to find out more tomorrow. I have to go now. I think I heard something outside. I'll update again when I have more information. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.